It's Councillor Katherine Barbour, and I'm a City Councillor representing Portswood Ward.
So the government have announced that Ofwat is to be abolished and to be sort of merged into a single regulator for England and Wales. How do you think this will affect Southampton?
Well, I don't think that the Ofwat has really had very much of an impact on Southampton historically. And so it appears to me that this new organisation, which will probably be a very similar type of organisation with the same sort of unelected, unrepresentative people potentially being paid to try to manage this service, I don't think it's really going to make any difference. I think we'll continue with the same issues that we have done. So it's very disappointing.
And what do you think the government should do differently?
Well, that's an enormous question. I mean, the first thing that the Green Parties, which I'm a member of, is saying is about renationalising the water companies. So that's part of it. But clearly, whoever is looking after the water companies needs to have some sort of oversight. And historically, that's been done by the Environment Agency. And they have had their funding enormously cut. So I think if I was in the government at this time, apart from renationalising water, I would increase the funding for the Environment Agency so that they're able to work in collaboration with the water companies and work towards making our waters, the ways that they need to be in order for all of the creatures that live in them to thrive. And for us, when we go on into beside the water, also to be able to thrive. So it could be a very positive thing for the government to do, and I think it would have enormous backing. I think that currently the last survey that was done on this said that something like 90% of people wanted water to be renationalised. So it would have huge support.
And is there anything, I suppose, what the city council could do to improve water pollution? Because obviously that might not be within their powers, but do you think there's more that they could be doing?
I think the council's in a difficult position. It's been contacting Southern Water regularly. I've been campaigning on this issue for 7 years now. And I think the City Council and the local MP, who was the leader of the council before she became our MP, had regular meetings with Southern Water to try to get them to address the issues that the public were bringing up to us and that we were seeing happening as our city is growing. Because if you're growing a population by 9,000 a year, the infrastructure needs to be in place to cope with that. We haven't got a local plan, or the local plan we have is quite out of date and is waiting for guidance from government to be reissued. So that makes it harder for the council to have sway over a variety of companies, including Southern Water. I'm trying to think of other things that the council could be doing. We have a Lindsay McCulloch who leads on the ecology of the city, and we also have a councillor who leads on net zero and a green and blue city. And so those people have been trying to address the issues and work with Southern Water. But I think today, I had a meeting today with Southern Water, and it's been the first time that I felt that there's a potential for things to improve in our city.
And do you think that this So you're saying the city council is obviously in a pretty awkward position because obviously it's of the same party as the central government, but obviously it has its own local problems, perhaps.
Yeah, well, clearly, there's been guidance that's coming out about bathing water status, widening the scope of that. So it's not just about people who swim in the water, it's about people who canoe and sail and use the water to increase the range and number of people who'd be using the water. And that's guidance that's come out from central government. And that can be really positive when we're making an application through the City Council for bathing water status, to have it encompassing a much wider number of people.
And during the years you've been campaigning on this particular issue, what extent of deterioration have you seen in the waterways?
We've only recently started regularly monitoring the quality of the water in the Itchen. So Friends of Itchen Estuary have been doing citizen science projects. Prior to that, we had a belief that there were problems with the water, but the only evidence we had was from the irregular monitoring that was done by the Environment Agency. And so, today we believe there are about 180 salmon left in the River Itchen, and that's a dangerously low level of population, and it's at high risk of extinction. And so we may or may not be able to save the River Itchen salmon in the next few years. Southern Water have planned to upgrade the quality of the water, but it's going to take 4 or 5 years for the work that they're planning to do to come to fruition. So I'm just hanging on by my fingernails, really, that we can clean up the river enough to grow our population of salmon again.
And with the declining salmon population, how much of it is to do with the water pollution in terms of sewage being pumped into the waterways, and how much do you think of it is more to do with the broader climate change issue?
Well, I don't really know enough about the subject to be able to comment on that in detail. But clearly, when you've got a river that's highly polluted with nitrogen and with ammonia, this isn't going to be an environment in which the salmon will thrive. And so that can lead to has led to a decline in their numbers. In terms of other things that are happening, clearly salmon spend a lot of their time out in the seas and only come up the River Itchen to spawn, and then they die. So it's needs a scientist with that level of understanding of the salmon population really to comment on that.
And do you think so how do you think the city council has sort of responded in terms of climate policies?
Well, the city took a climate when Chris Hammond was the leader in 2019. The city recognised that our climate was under threat and launched a Green City Charter and got a lot of agencies, organisations to sign up to that. So that was an exciting time for the city. But since then, we've had a lot of financial issues for the city, and so they've had to decrease the number of staff that they have and to reduce a lot of the non-statutory things that they do. And so every time that happens, the ability of staff to work alongside the general public, to get communities engaged with projects, you're reliant on bidding for national funding to do projects, and if they aren't within things that the national government think are important, those funding streams aren't going to be emerging. So the city's really been hamstrung enormously by an extraction of power from local authorities and the budget cuts, to just really having to follow the policies and the areas of work that the government think are worthy of being funded. And again, all of those pots of funding have to be bid for, and that takes a lot of time to do that. And so it means that you're not always necessarily responding to local issues in your own area, which are, could be more important than things that the government want you to focus on. So I really think that, all local authorities have been dealt a very, very poor hand over the last 15, 20 years through the successive governments that we've had in office.
So do you think central governments need to sort of back the local authorities more in terms of tackling climate change?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, if you look at different parts of the country, there's Portsmouth, for example, where there's high risk of flooding in the South Sea area. And they've been able to bid for funding to get sea barriers increased. And so, they've been able to work there and to build a project. If you go down to Portsmouth and have a look at the work that's been done there, it's really attractive, alongside, the very serious issue of defending a large population from flooding. So if you don't have these sort of local initiatives happening, we've got issues here in Southampton with potential for flooding here. If you don't have that funding being made available, the project that was planned for Southampton, I think, has recently been put on the back burner because of the cost of that project. And so, we're sort of looking at our river, and we're hoping that devolution may be the way to access funding in the future, because that may be a way that if we're working on a larger geography, that those sort of assessments will be done, and the risks of impact that it could have on business and on populations in Southampton of flooding, can be addressed through a project. But there's no guarantee of that. It could be that other bodies take precedence.
And is it the hope that with this devolution, the local authority in Southampton and indeed the Solent mayor will have a high budget to work with? Well,
I mean, obviously that is the hope, that there will be more money around. I think it's unlikely that, we look at other cities that have pursued this, Manchester and London, and they've done some really amazing work, particularly on transport and on reducing pollution in London. So, we have to live in hope, Harry, because, for your future and for my grandchildren's future, we've got to have funding. You've got to have the investment now in our addressing the issues, so that your future, you can thrive and have a great life, and not be thinking, do I have children myself? What's the world going to be like in the future? So, they're really, really big decisions that need to be taken. And unfortunately, I think successive governments have just ducked those issues because of the impact that's going to have on everybody. Potentially people not being able to fly as much, people not being able to drive as much, people having to live differently. And I think, that's a really big, giving things to people is much easier than taking things away. So, this recent example of voting, reducing the voting age to 16, that may or may not happen. But once the voting age comes down to 16, it's really difficult then to take that away and say, oh no, we're putting it back to 18. So we have to really think carefully before we, make a change like that. I think, anyway, we're not here to talk about voting ages.
Do you think Southampton, in terms of its transport, has lagged behind the likes of, Manchester and London, as you mentioned? Because, of course, I'm only speaking anecdotally, but when I come to Southampton, there is quite a lot of congestion. And do you think reducing the congestion and encouraging maybe more public transport or green alternatives is something Southampton has sort of struggled to grasp?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've got, I always talk about the topography of Southampton because it is difficult with the rivers that we have here and the fact that, quite a lot of the space around us is sea, which, that's actually a great bonus. And we should encourage that. But you do need to think 20 years ahead when you're thinking about transport. And I think Southampton has some excellent bus services and really, really good train services as well. We had a campaign in the Green Party to reduce bus fares to £1. And we got a lot of backing for that and got a debate on that in the council chamber probably about 3 years ago. And I see now that, there are £2 bus fares we've had and the 5 people for a £5 campaign, bus fares again this summer. So they're really encouraging people to use the buses that we have. And so that's great. So I think there's some really good work that's been done around public transport. But clearly there have been some other decisions which haven't been so good. And for me as a Portswood councillor, the bus gate, for example, really was quite a big mistake. But if you sort of think about it, thinking, because you have to think across the whole of Hampshire, really. Southampton brought in the Voy scooter. And that's, a new method of travel, really quite an innovative thing to do. And also the initially Beryl bikes and now they're Voy bikes. Really exciting, to be able to just pick up a means of transport and to use it, between A and B and then to return it. So I think, those sort of things are, I know there have been issues about other scooters in the city and people using them on the pavements. And, it's down to good policing, really, of, those services. If people were getting fined for going on the pavements, they'd quickly stop going on the pavements, and then they'd tell their friends that they'd got fined. So it doesn't take a lot to change that. But the impact that has, I think they did research at the University of West of England and said it took 17% of car journeys out of the city Bath and Bristol, where they did that research. So, for us in Southampton, that's the sort of thing we need. And there are people thinking about trams and other things in the future. So I think there's the potential through devolution for some very exciting transport options. Whether we'll have the leadership and the people, running the council in 5 years' time who'll take that forward, time will tell, really. I hope there are going to be lots more Green councillors and that we'll be able to be involved, hopefully in a coalition of steering the direction of Southampton.
And have you seen, I suppose, more sort of will for these things out in the street? Because when I come to Southampton, I see, cycle lanes, designated cycle lanes with cycle traffic lights. And I think back not that long ago, and that was a much rarer sight in cities. Yeah,
it's great. I mean, I cycle everywhere around the city. And, I find I've started to learn the routes that are, that are less busy, and there's actually been some mapping done of less polluted routes in the city, so cyclists and walkers can find better routes to go. So certainly a lot of progress has been made, and Southampton Cycling Campaign have been part of that, and go out and survey areas where changes are being planned and give advice to councillors and to council staff. So it's exciting times.
Southampton also has a lot of parks as well. I mean, that's a huge benefit for the city. Do you think these green spaces obviously need to be sort of encourage more for people to visit? Because maybe a lot of people might not be aware of them.
Yeah, well, I think they certainly, when you do surveys of the population of Southampton, what do they like about the city? The number one thing that people say is the parks. So I think they are quite well known, but clearly we need more. So we need, we've built a micro park down by West Quay. That's the latest park that's being created. But every time there's a housing development, flats are being built or student housing, there seems to be, most of that area seems to be concrete. There doesn't seem to be an offsetting and saying, we've got to have a large green space. And they just assume that all the parks that we currently have will just absorb more and more people. And, if you go up to the common at the weekend and see people up there picnicking and barbecuing, and then, go to the bins at the end of the day, they're absolutely chock full, and people start to leave rubbish just beside the bin because there's no more room in it. So I think there's quite a lot of pressure already on our parks. And so if we could create some more, we actually have a target to create more parks and green spaces around the city. And that would be amazing if, land could be given over to that rather than constantly more and more building and concreting over grass areas. And so that just means more water runoff. And when there's heavy rain, the sewage system gets completely flooded because we don't have a separate system for sewage and water runoff. So it's complex. It's a very complex business running a city. I commend the people who do it.
I suppose part of the complexity as well is that there's a housing shortage, housing crisis, and there's a need to build more houses, but also there's the other need of protecting the environment. Yeah,
it's very difficult. I mean, you look at other countries in Europe and they've gone for more flats with green spaces around them, maybe higher blocks of flats. But yes, the Green Party is really concerned. I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have in Southampton about the housing crisis. People coming out of care, people moving to the city for work, families wanting to stay here. I mean, I was at a meeting yesterday with a range of people who are having issues with their landlord. And, they're worried sick about losing their tenancy. We've still got legislation. We've still got the Section 21 eviction notices. And so, tenants don't want to make a fuss about mould, water running down the walls, the roof leaking. People, are scared to say anything because they're worried that they'll lose their homes. And the cost of rent, the rent is high in the city. So yes, desperately need more housing, and we're looking abroad and looking at some of the modular housing plans that other places have done to try to address this.